Okay, great. So I've been working on the Triton, not Titan, 1 to 5 million map that we got funded a couple years ago. So I've been working on this project with Alex Padoff, and Mike Blend has been doing a bunch of the data restoration for us. And we've also been working with Tom Waters, Jeff Collins, and Tammy Becker to kind of get back into the ice giant systems that we have. So go ahead and move slides, please. Right, so really quick, Triton was a giant surprise. It probably originated in the Kuiper belt, which makes it a really interesting sort of data point where we have this sort of Kuiper belt object a little bit closer to home that's pretty easy to get to, relatively speaking. And, you know, essentially gives us another data point for another body that we have detailed images of now that we have Pluto and company. So we think Triton's really exciting. So that's why we were really motivated to propose to do this project. Slide, please. So this was not just a mapping proposal. This was also a proposal to sort of restore and make more accessible the existing Triton images that are useful for geologic analysis. So it's both sort of a restoration project as well as a geologic mapping project. But for the purposes of this meeting, we're talking about a 1 to 5 million sim. In that previous slide, that's the orthographic projection. That's the mosaic that we're using, which is a 600 meter per pixel mosaic. And Mike Bland not only restored all of the individual images, but also made us a new mosaic that we're using as our base map. Can you go to the next slide? So here is our new base map. That's the one on the right-hand side of your screen. The original is on the left-hand side of the screen. It's made out of 16 individual Voyager images. I think that's old text on the bottom of the slide there, but essentially there's about 41 images that are really going to be part of this data archive that we're producing, and won't be, of course, released with the map, but will be additional data that we go ahead and archive. And you can see that, of course, the base maps do look relatively similar, but there is some additional detail that we can get out of the new base map that we couldn't get in the original base map. So this is what we've been using for our map. Slide. Right, so we're certainly not the first ones to work on this map, and I just wanted to sort of breeze through this to say we're not starting from scratch. We're using existing publications to inform our map. However, none of these exist sort of as digital maps. The image on your right, Candy Hansen's plume locations, and then down at the sort of middle bottom, Paul Schink's craters, are data sets that we are sort of restoring, digitizing, and we'll be including in sort of supplementary data that'll be included in our map project. Slide. Great, so the two images that you have here are on the left, you have some of our surface features and that line work. It's a little hard to see because I left everything black. I probably should have changed the colors. And then on the right is kind of our first cut at terrain units. And some of the things that I want to point out here, and I want to start on the right with our terrain units because that's kind of where we started with our mapping. Please ignore the horrible color choices here, but sometimes ARC just gives you the worst options. I think there's about 17 units here, the linear structures. Those are sort of the ridge features that we have across the surface. And Triton's really hard because you only have such a finite set of images. And I suspect what's going to end up happening with these units is that overall the boundary lines won't change. So I would consider this to be more or less final, but we may end up sort of lumping some of these terrain units together as we start sort of describing why we think they're different than the other. So there's still a little bit more work to be done there in terms of, really finalizing sort of the individual units, because I think there are some in there that we're going to combine together. But ultimately, this isn't wholly dissimilar from what other investigators have done, but certainly this will be the first sort of digitized version of this that will be available for further analysis. And then moving to the left-hand side of the screen, where sort of our surface features have been mapped. Of course, the linear structures that have really been identified sort of since the flyby of Voyager. So these aren't really new. These aren't, we're not seeing anything new in the base map that wasn't seen before. But one of the things that we're working really hard towards is trying to make sure that not only are we representing the surface really well, but one of the things we're struggling with is how best to do that. So in a lot of previous sort of small regional scale maps, the individual cells within the cantaloupe terrain, so that's the stuff on the sort of left-hand corner. Alex, you know where I'm pointing. Can you point for it for me? The sort of upper left-hand side of the mosaic, yeah. So all those little individual sort of bits of line work are the individual cells within the cantaloupe terrain, which are called cavity. And so one of the things that we're trying to figure out is how do we best represent those so that not only is this map providing a data set for people to use, let's say in modeling, or let's say in doing some spatial analysis, but in a way that's really useful for sort of the printed map product. So all the things that we've outlined here are things that will be an appropriate size on the printed map, but trying to figure out the best way to identify those, the best way to map them, and the best way to represent them on the surface. So those are kind of the things that we're struggling with a little bit. Is that my last slide, Alex? So I overlaid the two. I think this is my last slide. I overlaid the two. We did assign some preliminary names to these terrain units, and that's kind of where we're at right now. Is we need to finish the surface feature line work that we have right now. I think we're reasonably close to making that happen, but there's a little bit more work that needs to be done. And then Alex and I need to do our kind of last cut of sort of duking out whose line work we like better. And sort of deciding which lines we'll keep and which ones we might toss, and then essentially combining any of these original, these sort of terrain units into maybe larger units. But this is kind of our first cut of where we're at. We still have a little bit of ways to go, but we're not so far away from sort of doing our final preparation of our DOMO and COMO and our map text and getting this prepared to hopefully get out for review by the end of the year is the target right now.